remember that it could be our mall, it could be our concert, it could be our church or synagogue or mosque, it could be us, and it will be us. It will be us if we don't take care of these issues. There are things we can do. They're just common sense matters, and we should all be talking about them, urging action on our friends, our neighbors, voters, and our representatives so that children and families do not have to live in fear in this country. So let's go on to the show. It's really terrific to have you. And please do contribute any prompts. Your prompts are better than mine, generally. Welcome to the Nonprofit Report, your update on nonprofit organizations, issues, and leaders. I'm your host, Mark Oppenheim. Today, we're discussing with experts foster care and adoptive services with special guests. Shaheer Mustafa, President and CEO of HopeWell Incorporated in Dedham, Massachusetts. Bill Weisberg, Executive Director at Forestdale Incorporated in Brooklyn, New York, and Paul Robinson, President and CEO of the Home of the Innocents in Louisville, Kentucky. So we have the nation here assembled. A reminder to Zoom attendees that we will take 3 snap polls during the show, and we'll announce results. And your questions submitted to the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen will be included in our discussion. So thank you all for joining us. It's just great to have you. And I'm so looking forward to talking about young people. It's my favorite topic in the world. I'm going to set you up, and I'm going to go over to you, Shaheer. May is National Foster Care Awareness Month. And we wanted to acknowledge sort of that fact and also elevate consciousness of foster care and the importance of us all coming together to care for our young people. If we can do it ourselves, that's just wonderful. We need a lot of foster parents. If we can help through funding, through writing a check, that's important. If we can volunteer, that's important. There are over 400,000 kids in the foster care system on any given day, and about 130,000 of those await adoption. So Shaheer, let's talk a little bit about HopeWell and about how you see the challenges from your perspective. Then we're going to go around the room. Then we're going to come back to some of the ways that we can improve our system. But Shaheer, could you give us the view from HopeWell in Massachusetts?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to have this conversation and just around centering the experience of youth in foster care. I've heard the term an invisible population, but I feel like that puts the onus on kids to be seen. I think our community, our society, they are an unseen population. They are out there. They are among us. They're in our schools, in our communities, and we need to elevate their stories because it's really kind of shocking and unacceptable, the outcomes that they experience despite our best intentions. So at HopeWell, we're the largest nonprofit provider of foster care in the Commonwealth. We recruit, license, train, foster parents. That's our kind of core business. But the work that I'm most interested in is really around the intersection of academic opportunity and the foster care experience. And, if we look at the data for this population when they age out of foster care, there is no more marginalized group of young people in our country than young people exiting foster care. So nationally,
just pause here. Let's talk about aging out of. When does that happen? When we're going to have First Place for Youth which has a renowned national program. And by the way, we recruited the last 2 leaders there for aging out of foster care. When does that happen? Could you just enlighten us?
Yeah, I mean, every state's a little bit different. In Massachusetts, at 18, young people have the opportunity to voluntarily opt in for post-18 services and supports, and that can carry them up to their 22nd birthday. But there's a lot of conditions that are required of young people in order to stay engaged with the child welfare system.
Yeah. So, Bill, could you give us the view from Forestdale? We're going to come back to you, Shaheer, and we'll continue that description. Bill, could you give us the view from Brooklyn?
Sure. Thank you, Mark. So Forestdale has been serving Brooklyn and Queens, the 2 most populous boroughs of New York City, for 170 years now. And you were asking about what we need in foster care and what our children need. And the first thing is great foster homes. So in New York City, I want you to guess just yourselves how many children were in foster care in New York City in 1992. So that's just about 30 years ago. And the answer is there were almost 50,000 children in care. Today, there are just over 6,000. So there's been a remarkable decline in the number of kids who had to be removed from homes because of imminent danger. And that's a good thing, because it's traumatic for children to be removed from their families. You only want to do it when it's absolutely, absolutely necessary. What's allowed that is that there are a lot more preventive services. So there are many factors, but one of them is New York City has invested a lot in prevention and working with families as they're experiencing instability so they can stay together. But in terms of what's needed, what's interesting is with that rapid decline in the number of children in care in New York City, the number of foster homes has declined even more rapidly. It's understandable, because one of the things you need to do to be a foster parent is to have space for children. Space in New York City is really, really expensive. There aren't as many people who have extra bedrooms to give to children. And so we are very eager to find more homes, so that the biggest factor that influences a child's experience in foster care is the quality of the home they're placed into.
Paul, could you round this up? And then I'd like to go back to Shaheer and continue sort of going around the room. But give us the view from Louisville.
Sure. Thank you for having me here today. Home of the Innocents is a 143-year-old organization. In fact, we just celebrated our birthday just about a week and a half ago. At the heart of our mission is serving the children of our Commonwealth that are both medically fragile, but then also children that are in the state's foster care system. And Bill, I wish that I could share the same trend in Kentucky that you're experiencing in New York, but that's not the case. I've been the leader of our organization for about 7 years. And in that 7 years, the number of children in state's care really has remained rather constant. About 8,500 children remain in state's care as of today. And I think really at the heart of this, quite honestly, is that children are not a priority. Children don't have a voice. Children don't vote. And the resources of our state just are not applied to really truly address the needs of our children. And that's not to penalize anybody that's in government, either executive or legislative branch. It is just the way our society prioritizes children. And that's quite unthinkable for me, I think. One of the things that is unique to Kentucky in a bad way is that we are one of the top states for child fatalities and child abuse. And so that is a factor that sends children more readily into state's care, and something that we've got to fix in order to truly get upstream of this issue and make a difference for kids.
So let's talk about some of these issues that you each raised. I'd like to, because I cut you off, because Shaheer, I sort of cut you off in the middle of you making a point, because I thought you made a really good one. Could you just sort of continue to round out your view of foster care from your perspective? And then also, let's talk a little bit about this whole idea of statistics and the changes that have happened recently, because Bill mentioned this whole idea that there are fewer foster care families, both in terms of supply of foster care families, as well as foster parents, as well as fewer placements. But there's also a change in New York that happened, which is that people were designated as being placed by families, with families in a different way previously than today. So some of that statistical capture is just a matter of definition. Shaheer, how do you see these long-term trends in Massachusetts, referring to some of the long-term trends that Bill was mentioning? How do you see this evolving?
Yeah, so I mean, I think we can't have this conversation without talking about the Family First Prevention Services Act, right? So the movement from the federal government to kind of support keeping kids proximate to families and doing a lot more work on the prevention side. So I think, we have to address or acknowledge how we conflate poverty with child abuse. In Massachusetts, about 85% of the child welfare reports are screened for neglect, which in my opinion is a proxy for poverty. And so, you can't talk about the child welfare system without talking about the conditions of poverty and how that affects folks. And then when we look at just the impact of our system. So look, I run this organization, but I was in state child welfare. I ran child welfare response across 31 cities and towns in Massachusetts. So I've worked for DCF, and I have seen horrible things that people do to children. We need a foster care system. There needs to be, as you mentioned, certain kids for many reasons will not be able to remain home with their families or they're a kinship caregiver. We need to have a structured system in place. But my concern is the scale and scope of those systems and the creep and the institutional racism that I think underlies a lot of these systems. So in Massachusetts, we have about 100,000 reports every single year for child abuse and neglect, and about half of them are screened in for a protective response. We've got about 13,000 kids that will experience foster care in Massachusetts. So I think we have this we have an outsized child welfare kind of apparatus, but then we have a mismatch where we only have 5,000 foster homes to support those 13,000 kids in care. So to Bill's point, there's not enough actual homes stepping up to care for these kids. And then what we see on the back end is just horrible, right? So 3% will achieve a post-secondary degree. Almost half will experience homelessness within a year of exiting care. And in Massachusetts, 80% of males who have any kind of contact with the child welfare system will be arrested, incarcerated on probation or parole by the time they're 26. So that's
80%.
80%. Yeah.
Bill, is this the same statistic that you find? Paul, is it the same statistic that you find?
Yeah, so I think, Shaheer, you're really citing mostly national statistics. So that's not just Massachusetts. That's kind of the trends we see across the country. The most obvious thing we have to do is create greater equity in our society and address child poverty with their federal policies that do that aren't always supported. So we want to get at the root causes, but we do find that for kids even aging out of care, in New York City, we had a really successful advocacy campaign called Fair Futures, which was to cover young people who are exiting care with life coaching, with education specialists, with housing specialists, with career specialists, even up to age 26, long after they'd exited care. Because a 23-year-old will often end up couch surfing or not really having stable housing, and they can come back for services voluntarily, and those are provided. And so we piloted some programs, and we found that with really intensive academic support, we were getting high school seniors graduating at a 90% rate, which was better than the general population. So clearly we want to start addressing issues earlier and earlier and at their root causes. But when a young person's been in care and is exiting, the national statistics are really, really poor. But we find that with intensive services, we can mitigate some of that.
Paul, in terms of what you've said about Kentucky's prioritization of children or lack thereof, nobody wants to not prioritize kids. What do you think the source of that is? Because it can't be that Kentuckians are evil. I know Kentuckians, they're not evil, right? What's going on in the state that we have a situation, if your observations are correct and you're in the center of this issue, why is it so difficult for Kentucky's children to find the kind of care from the adults that they deserve?
Well, that's a big question, Mark. I think really at the heart of this is that, there are so many priorities that our state faces every year. They have to balance a budget, and, there is a drug epidemic problem that's facing our state and the country. There is poverty issues that you heard brought up also. So there's so many needs. And so as the needs are being prioritized, it just always tends to be that children end up being on the bottom of that priority ladder. And I think, that's probably because, again, there's such vulnerable populations. There's the elderly, there's the disabled and whatnot. What we find when we go to our state capital and we advocate for our children, there's lots of people there advocating, and there's lots of people that seem to be very interested.
Right.
But in the end, when decisions are made, funding for programs that benefit children are the programs that typically get cut first. So, I mean, and that is the reality. I did want to just mention, back to what you were talking about earlier about kind of the national trends, what we know for the children that are aging out of care in the state of Kentucky. Most of them at the age of 18, once they age out of care, they end up homeless and jobless. And a statistic that I heard many years ago that just continues to haunt me is that if they remain homeless and jobless by the time they turn 25 or 26, there's a 70% likelihood that they will remain on government assistance for the remainder of their life. And so we have come up with programming specifically for 18 to 24-year-olds that is intended to help them find housing, help them get a job, but then also that case management and that support that they need to help them continue, to navigate life is so critically important. That intensive service that you heard Bill talking about is critical to try to break that cycle so that they have a life to look forward to when they get to become a young adult.
Do we have a problem in this country that we're not really identifying as Americans? We're identifying as if we are adherents to separate groups. Republicans and Democrats, right? Groups that divide by race, group that divides by gender identity or income. And that we're not really taking care of ourselves, because if we're going to take care of the whole country, we have to see beyond the group that we belong to, right? I mean, the group of guys who are 6'2" and white and of a certain age, it's a smaller group than the entire country, right? So if I don't identify as an American and I see a kid that is in need and I can't open my heart and my wallet and my time to that young person, or a myriad of other issues, right? We basically become isolated in our problems, and the problems fester, doesn't it, Shaheer?
I think like at a high level, I would agree with you, but I think there's some nuance with respect to my experience in talking to folks about foster care. I feel like it cuts through all of that. I think there's a universal sense of justice when you see a child who has been failed by the adults in their life.
Or you see an adult who as a child was failed, right?
Right, exactly. But folks can see that young person and they see them as held harmless in the situation, and they just want to extend support. So I have found the challenge is to take it from like a meta level, like a systems level, and actually have a young person at the end of that, because that's it's an undeniable pull at your empathy and your emotions as a human being. And so I think part of what our systemic challenge is in our efforts to preserve, for example, confidentiality of a child, we do these like amorphous campaigns instead of really targeted outreach. The more targeted outreach, we tend to get a lot more inquiries. We're willing to step up and care for a child because they're like, oh, like they love the Celtics. I'm a huge Celtics fan. Like we could watch the games together. I know it sounds simple and stupid, and it's not like you're going to, the MSPCA and adopting a puppy. This is not the same thing. And we need to have rigorous standards for how people come into this work. But there is something about being proximate and being close that just cuts through all that noise.
You're activating our individual empathy, right? I mean, this is something without treating children as if they are puppies, right? How do you end up doing that, Bill? Where you're trying to create within me a connection, awaken with me in something that our modern society has deadened, frankly, and in a village setting would have been different, right? You see a small child, and you're in a village setting, you sort of deal with it. But we live all these separate lives, particularly if we have moderate or higher income, where we don't have to live on the streets with other people, right? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, so people many people have tremendous empathy for children and children who've been through traumatic experiences and need help healing. So that does appeal, I would agree with Shaheer, across partisan divides. Foster care is not a particularly contentious issue. People seem to care about children who need this kind of help. I think we have more disagreements about some of the root causes and ways to address them. And we can appeal to people who want to help children. So there are a lot of people who want to volunteer and mentor or do reading with children in an elementary school. Being a foster parent is another level of challenge and responsibility. It takes a very, very special person. And there's no more meaningful way to help a child with multiple needs than being a foster parent. And so we can appeal to their heartstrings about it. But in the end, we have to find people who are capable of stepping up. And many of our kids really do have multiple needs, and you're taking them to therapy appointments and getting them special ed services. And you're going above and beyond just giving space to a child in your home. And so it's really finding ways to find those special people who have that ability. I'm thinking of one foster parent we recently honored, who is amazing at transforming teenagers who are trying to find a better path. And she works with the Department of Education in New York City. She's dedicated, and she takes young people who are struggling and helps them on toward college graduation. That's a rare, rare person. I don't think I have those abilities. And so it's finding those people and just giving them support they need. And that's the other thing, like, how do you find foster parents? Through word of mouth is the way most of us find them. And so we need foster parents who have a good experience being foster parents. And so we give them 24-hour support and health supports and other things, help escorting children, because it is such a difficult thing to do.
And valuing the skills, right, Paul? I mean, that's the thing. You know, we as a society, we really don't appreciate the skill that Bill is describing. I mean, that is a professional skill. It's a professional level. It's a doctor, it's an engineer, it's a rocket scientist, right? Level skill, but it's in human empathy, it's in human caretaking, it's in helping a young person navigate. We need to, even if we don't adequately compensate somebody of that level of skill to transform a teenager's life, right? We should at least appreciate it and recognize it, shouldn't we?
Well, this particular discussion is very personal for me. I'm a father of 5 children, 2 of which are adopted. So before I even came to lead the organization that I'm at, my wife and I had 2 very traumatized children that came into our lives. And what you're hearing us discuss, being taking them to therapy appointments and being up at 2 a.m. when they wake up with night frights, or they have a reactive attachment because they have had really bad examples of relationships in their life. This is really difficult work. And I'm not saying that it's not about me. I'm just giving that as an example. The foster parents that work in partnership with our organization are a very special group of people. They are very committed. They're very dedicated, but it's hard to find them because it is such difficult work. And I think people hear the stories about the hardship and the difficulties, and I think that may be a barrier for other people to consider. But at the end of this is incredible transformation that can be made possible. The reward at the end of this is you're giving a child a chance, and you're giving a child their life back, and you're helping them gain resiliency, and that's priceless. And so to Bill's point again, I think it is very much one-on-one conversations. When you can talk to a potential foster parent and you can help them see that reward on the tail end of their hard work, good people sign up to make that work happen.
You know, we just got a couple questions and really great points made. There was a question about the criteria for becoming a foster care parent, and a more textured iteration of that question was also provided by a second viewer who talked about not only are there very strict requirements that require income, certain definitions of household stability. So in some states require heterosexual parents. And if you take a look at the kids coming into foster care, They come out of all different circumstances. And there is a proportionately higher number of people who identify as LGBTQ plus individuals as a consequence of their rejection by society, sometimes by their parents. You have an increased foster care population in those areas. How do those definitions function in your various states? How does that impact the supply of foster care parents? And do you think that the correct balance has been reached between safety and ensuring that the parent is equipped and emotionally equipped and is going to be a good foster care parent versus the fact that we should be able to allow for access across the board of people who are willing to learn, are capable, and could increase the number of foster care parents? So Paul, let's start with you. Let's go around the other direction, and then we'll go to Bill and then Shaheer.
Sure. So in Kentucky, the regulations require that you have to be 21 years of age or older in order to be considered a foster parent. You can't have a serious criminal history. So you have to be clear from child abuse charges or any conviction of a violent crime. But I think the most important part is the threshold of the definition of financially stable, because you have to be in a good financial position in order to provide care and have that environment that I think that the state is looking for. Our agency also is very intentional about making sure that our potential foster parents have a reliable mode of transportation, because the parents are going to have to make sure that children can be taken to appointments, therapy, case management, all the different various spokes on the wheel. And so those are the main things. But truly, the most important criteria is, do you have a heart? Do you have a commitment and a passion for giving of yourself to serve children? And that's something that there's no test. It is a soft skill that we have to interview for, and we have to make a subjective opinion about whether or not we think you're going to be a good fit or not.
So Paul, do you feel like a good balance has been reached in Kentucky in terms of assessing parents?
I think the state does the best that they can. I think we're always striving to do better. You always hear the story of a bad foster parent. There's always going to be that one example, but for the great majority, I think the systems in place do a great job of trying to protect and safeguard and put standards in place.
And Bill, do you feel that way? When I was working at the Child Welfare Administration, City of New York, we had some issues. And it was during those times when foster care levels were much, much higher. And then even then, you could see the systems being put in place. I had a small part in that to get to where you are. How do you feel things are today in terms of the assessment of foster care parents and support that are provided to foster care parents as they undertake their very important work?
Yeah, Mark, since a lot of the screening criteria are similar to the ones Paul mentioned, I won't repeat them. You also have to be medically able to take care of a child and have space for a child in your home. And I also want to go back to the second questioner in the chat about LGBT or having to be married and heterosexual couples. In New York State, we need affirming homes because a lot of our young people in care do identify as LGBTQ. And so we're looking for affirming homes. We have a lot of single parents. We have a lot of same-sex parents in foster care in New York City, and that's a great thing. The other trend, and so I think we do a pretty good job with screening. As Paul said, there are the bad actors that sometimes get through, and really through unannounced home visits that we do in the middle of the night. I mean, we do things where we take kids aside to talk to them and make sure they're okay. We do medical exams to make sure they're okay. But one of the other trends we should probably mention, which is a positive one, is toward kinship care. In New York City, we're up to about 50% of kids are going with extended family.
Right.
And it's a very different feeling for a child to stay part of the family. And so that's a really positive trend. But it means you really have to investigate Aunt Julia, who's taking in this child, as a kinship preference to make sure that she can also provide a good home. And so that's one of the new challenges in the field, but it's a very positive one.
And Shaheer, you made the point, and I'd like to link that to Bill's point on kinship care, you made the point that you see neglect as a proxy for low income. And so if you have a child who is living in an environment which is being processed by the state as being neglectful, but it's really a proxy for low income, then how does kinship care function within the state? Because poverty runs in families, and it's unusual to have an isolated family unit living in poverty where the rest of the family is thriving. So how do you deal with that intersection of trying to keep families together and also not being so judgmental when you see somebody living in a you're processing it as neglect of a child, but it's really the family is just in complete distress? How do you deal with that calculus?
Yeah, so this is like, it may be an uncomfortable reality, is that this is like not an exact science. I mean, we're making our best guesses when we're assessing situations. And so what I think is important to acknowledge, and I think our systems in Massachusetts, we've done this as well, is acknowledging that our foster care systems doesn't do a great job of raising kids. Like so we can pull a kid out of a situation that we think is dangerous, and that may be the right thing. But what we can pretty much guarantee is by entering our foster care system, they're probably not going to do very well. And we heard all the statistics that bear that out, right? So on some level, we have to kind of trust what we know about human development, what we know about the impact of foster care when we assess families. And that's where the threshold really needs to be so high to remove a child, because it's these interventions are not, they cause harm themselves, right? Like, Massachusetts has also gotten up to about 50% of placements now are with kinship caregivers. And I think there used to be a mentality that like the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And I think there was a lot of bias built into the system. And I think our systems have done a much better job of like really evaluating that bias. And again, acknowledging that the systems that we have in place to try to protect kids, you know, actually sometimes can do harm. So I think there's been just a commitment to family preservation and the value of family, you know, because of what we know our system can do to kids when they're removed from those situations.
So we're going to go around the room one more time, and we're going to start with Bill, go to you, Shaheer, and we're going to give Paul the last word. If in doing these polls, we found a couple of different responses, which were very interesting. Basically, of the audience here, a third of the audience here has had some interaction with the foster care system as volunteers, as foster parents, as staff members, as board members, or as being foster kids themselves. And then we also asked about what is the biggest challenge and the best investment here for the foster care system. And it's really more online support, more support in general of both the young people and the foster parents. So let's talk about that. Bill, if you can give your cut, if there was one thing that we as a society can do, one investment that we can make, could you tell us what it would be from your perspective in Forestdale? And then Shaheer, and then Paul, we're going to give you the last word. Bill, if there's one thing, and I'm not talking about 5 things, I'm not talking about infinite, you know, resources and so on, but one thing we could do to help you, what would that be?
Because some children get involved with the child welfare system because of the influence of poverty, I think addressing child poverty would be the one thing I would start with, things like child tax credits and other things that reduce poverty. And you said one thing, and I'm going to sneak in a second, which is the right services. Paul talked about problems with addiction in Kentucky. We have them all over the country, mental health needs. And so in addition to poverty, to have a robust system of supports for parents. Many of the parents of the children we work with have been through similar things as children. They still should be our clients, and we should make sure they have the supports to be the parents they want to be to their children. And so having a robust system of supports for addiction and mental health once we've solved child poverty, which we could do in this country if we had the political will to do so.
So that's a hard act to follow, Shaheer. We've got child poverty, addiction, and mental health. What is the one thing from your perspective that?
So I'm not gonna let him off the hook so easily. Then just take that one for himself. So I think mine is a little bit of a riff, which is there seems to be a mismatch between what are the supports that are available to families versus what they need and the timeliness and accessibility of those services and supports. So I think we have the services and supports in many regards out there, but there are oftentimes arbitrary conditions, bureaucracy that gets in the way of accessibility, and just arbitrary time standards. Like you can have this support, but you can only have it for 3 months, or you can have this support, but then if you earn over a certain income, then we're going to cut you off from that support. So I think we just need to explore the system of supports that we have and make more common sense decisions around access and availability.
Great answer. So now, Paul, you're the closer.
Oh gosh, tough to follow on that. Okay, I get to cheat. I'm going to say two things, and I'll be very quick. First, I want to get upstream of the problem. Family First Prevention Services Act was intended to put more dollars into prevention. Truly, we need to try to figure out how to help support families where there's no threat of violence or physical harm. We need to help kids stay with their families in their homes if that's possible. That's investment in prevention. But if they're going to be disrupted and they're going to come into foster care, then I think we need to recognize so many of the kids age out of the system. More resource must go in to preparing them to live independently. So when they approach 16, 17, 18 years old, we need to wrap them fully in so much support to get them ready to be able to thrive as an independent 18-year-old. So many of them end up, again, on their own, without a family to help them, with such little thought of how they're going to navigate life. And again, as a father of 5 kids, all my kids are 18 and older now. My kids need me just as much as an 18-year-old and a 20-year-old and a 22-year-old as they did when they were younger. They need people to help them figure out how to get an apartment, how to buy a car, how to celebrate a birthday. That's what these young adults need. So,
and my answer to that question is that we should all support Home of the Innocents in Louisville, Kentucky, and you, Paul Robinson, and your folks. We should support Forestdale Incorporated in Brooklyn, New York, and you, Bill, and your folks, and in Dedham, Massachusetts, HopeWell International Incorporated. Shaheer, we should support you. I mean, it's really that simple. We can come to your support. We can be foster care parents. We can report on these issues. We can make a contribution. That's really an easy in, right? We don't have to make a commitment of a lifetime to write a check. And that's really how we can at least get involved. Thank you so much. Please thank your staff. Please thank your volunteers, your board members, your funders, your foster parents, and most of all, thank the young people who are really involved in cultivating their own lives. They're really involved in strengthening the country. We need them. We need their energy. We need to care for them. And they deserve a huge amount of credit for doing the hard work of uplifting themselves. They have power, and it's up to us adults to give them agency. Thank you.